Faculty Resources, CSUN Writing Center, and Faculty Development Collaboration. I'm Trista Payte, and I'm the Writing Programs Coordinator at CSUN, and I'm going to have my fellow presenters unmute and introduce themselves one at a time.
I'm Loretta Huizar. I'm a writing consultant at the CSUN LRC.
I'm Melissa Filbeck. I was a writing consultant at the CSUN LRC.
I'm Nayan Ramirez. I'm an assistant professor in criminology and justice studies at CSUN.
Our story begins in 2009 when the Chancellor's Office introduced the CSU Graduation Initiative 2025, which asked us to increase graduation rates, eliminate equity gaps in degree completion, and meet the California workforce needs. So here on this slide, we see a representation of where CSUN's numbers were when we got started. And then now we want to take a look and see, is our graduation rate getting better? And the answer is yes, tentatively, but there's also some issues. So here's the data collected on the 2013 cohort. Although we did gain some ground within all the student groups, as you can see, white students benefited the most. So we actually ended up increasing the graduation equity gap by 2 points with our Latinx students and 5 with our African-American students. So as you can imagine, campus-wide faculty and staff were looking for ways to address this now 24-point gap here and 15-point gap right here. So in the Writing Center, we did believe that we had a potential role to play. So we were sort of brainstorming about ways to explicitly address narrowing the CSUN equity gap and paying back the very clear educational debt owed to many of the students that were coming into CSUN. And we were actually introduced by Whitney Scott, the Director of Faculty Development. We were introduced to the work of Mary-Ann Winkelmes and the Transparency in Learning and Teaching Center at UNLV. And here on the screen is just some data we borrowed from Mary-Ann. And we were actually pretty blown away by her data on transparency and by the effect that it was having at UNLV. And the model for transparent design, we were very interested in her model. So we thought, well, what if we used her work as a jumping off point for doing some work right here at CSUN? So because of our unique position on campus, which provides us with intimate knowledge with student struggles, with writing across the disciplines, we partnered with FacDev to create a workshop in an attempt to create greater equity, transparency, and scaffolded assignments. So we started out with this research question: how do transparently designed assignments offer equitable opportunities for all students to succeed? And here were the key components of transparency that we started out wanting to address. So we have low-stake assignments for greater creativity and constructive risk-taking for students where we know they grow. We had flexible formats which appeal equitably to students' differing strengths and learning styles. We have logical sequencing to build critical thinking skills. We have targeted feedback in phases so as to not overwhelm students or faculty. We have the ability to clearly communicate purpose, task, and criteria, which gives students a sort of roadmap for success. We have the explication of the applicability and relevance to give assignments more meaning for students and to generate more interest in that way. And then we have engagement of students in applied shared criteria, which can increase belongingness and decrease imposter syndrome.
Are you watching or are you on video?
It's video.
Oh, okay.
So you might be wondering, what does a transparent assignment look like? We're really going to focus on that.
Okay, they can be in here.
No.
Really quickly, I just want to show you, there's a rather extensive checklist for transparent assignments that we did. Here are just some of the questions that you might find on that checklist. So you can see it's about asking very direct questions about your purpose, about your task, and about your criteria in ways that sort of center the student and the student's experience. And now I want to transition to Loretta, who's going to speak directly about the ways in which we
say more about it later.
Okay. Good so far?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
So while we had two main focuses during the workshop, transparency and scaffolding, for the sake of time, I'm focusing on examples that incorporated the transparency template that Trista showed you with the purpose, tasks, and criteria. So when we presented this specific example of purpose to instructors, we asked them the following questions. 1, as a student, what do you think you will learn from this assignment? 2, what skills will you gain based on this purpose? And 3, is there anything that seems unclear about this purpose? So we did this. This is a purpose from an actual assignment that we had permission to use from another instructor. And we did this in order to try to get instructors into the mindset of a student. While we all try to be clear, we hope these questions might underscore how students without prior knowledge or experience can get lost when there's knowledge taken for granted as we design assignments. So not only did we give instructors a template, the template with the purpose, task, and criteria and the checklist, we also included a list of verbs for significant learning. And we also had several generative discussions throughout the course of the workshop and on specific days about intended scope and specificity in assignment design. And you can see here where these discussions and the verbs for significant learning were incorporated in the revision. So the circled words are examples of those more specific concrete verbs. And hopefully, as you can see, the tasks are sort of show a purpose with a much more narrowed and specific scope. Again, when addressing the task section of an assignment, we asked instructors 2 questions. The first one, what tasks are required for successful completion of this assignment? And what tasks might be necessary for the student to complete before the stated task? So as you can see in this example, this seems pretty straightforward. A multiple choice assignment with a simple task, choose the best response. So, however, when you see this revision hopefully underscores the importance of the steps that we take for granted because of our expertise. So for example, read the chapter and take particular note of the following sections. But also, in this case, it also addresses the technological concerns students may have, especially with the increased reliance on Canvas and other platforms during COVID. These technological tools are only going to become more prevalent. And we want to remember that, many students are still not going to have equal access to these technological tools or the knowledge of how to access all of this technology. So we wanted to really underscore a few things that worked really well in this first iteration of this workshop. The community building. Community across disciplines is rare on most campuses, so I thought that was really a really great thing to see and experience. The group time for small activities, actually even more of that small group time was requested and needed. And the writing consultant individualized feedback that we gave, again, that was something that instructors requested more of. We did provide templates and annotated samples for discussion. We were really big on providing as many annotated samples and always providing templates. And we provided packets and PowerPoints with those samples. And then the LRC presentation and tour we gave at the end was really helpful in helping to increase our footprint on campus. But also it was really to underscore this and foster this move away from a deficit model of thinking about writing that we're really trying to encourage amongst not just students, but also amongst instructors. Give instructors the scope of what we can do for them, not just for students. The challenges we still faced, there's often, the big one is that there's still often a resistance to this transparency model for several reasons. Too many small assignments, some professors say, which students don't like. There's going to be more grading for me. it's going to be limit their creativity. It's going to be, you know, they're all going to do a paint by numbers or turn in the same assignment. And it's making assignments just too easy. It takes too much time. There's too much hand holding is another one we often hear. And so we did try to address all of these things, but these are some of the ongoing challenges that we really have to sort of work through as we consider going forward with the workshop.
So as we were thinking forward to future versions of the workshop, these were the things that we felt it was important to address up front. We had intentions of covering rubrics, but we didn't feel that we had the right amount of time to adequately and fully address rubrics and how they should work and how they can work out. We felt like we needed more time to explicitly discuss equity. The whole project is really based in equitable practices, but we wanted to have explicit conversations about equity and about how this sort of helps us pay back an educational debt that we owe to our students when they come into our institutions. We wanted to build in more time for the small group work, since faculty really expressed interest in wanting small group work, as well as one-on-one time with the faculty consultants and that asynchronous feedback from the consultants as they worked towards more transparent assignments. And we wanted to encourage more participation in the revision and the final showcase, which was a little lacking in our first iteration. So now I'm going to transition to Melissa, who's going to talk about these revisions that we made in the project.
Great. I'm going to be talking about some of the changes we made to the workshop for our 2020 and 2021 iterations to address some of the challenges Loretta and Trista just mentioned, along with some of the faculty feedback we got. I'm going to be going through the how and why behind just 5 of the major changes that we made. So first, as Loretta said, faculty participants reported in their feedback that they felt the workshop was most productive when we gave them time to actually work on revising assignments rather than delivering presentations. We restructured our workshop format, cutting back on our presentations and adding more time to do work. The image on the left in this slide is a screenshot of the schedule for our second session in the spring of 2021 workshop. And as you can see, almost half the time is set aside for breakout room activities. In our breakout groups, we wanted to give participants time to apply the concepts from the presentations directly to their own materials, so we designed some guided activities to facilitate that. On the right is a screenshot of one of the prompts for a breakout room activity. In this one, the participants are asked to apply the concept of purpose as it relates to transparent assignment design to their own assignment prompts. They also share their prompts within their small group, which gives them a rich pool of feedback to draw from and builds community within the workshop. In addition to more time to workshop their prompts, another feature participants found quite valuable was one-on-one feedback on their assignments. Originally, we worked exclusively in small groups in person during the workshop sessions, providing what individualized feedback we could during our weekly meetings. This meant that we struggled to give substantial individual feedback to every participant. Our solution was to have participants upload their revised assignment prompts as assignments in our course Canvas site. When submitting the assignment, participants were able to guide our feedback by including comments letting us know what specific areas they wanted feedback on or what questions they had for us. Then we workshop leaders were able to take time to read the assignments outside of the workshop meetings and provide thoughtful feedback via track changes in Microsoft Word. And you have an example of some of that commentary here in this screenshot on this slide. Moreover, we asked each participant to schedule a 30-minute one-on-one consultation with their workshop leader to discuss the prompt and our feedback. These one-on-one sessions were invaluable and enabled us, both us and our participants, to ensure we were on the same page as far as feedback and make sure that all of their questions were answered. Through this, though this new model did require us to spend some time outside of workshop hours providing the asynchronous feedback, it was well worth it, and faculty feedback indicated that it was extremely helpful. So while we've always opened this faculty development workshop with a discussion of how transparency is vital to reducing student equity gaps, we felt that we could do better by returning to this concept again later in the workshop. What we didn't want was to create the impression that equity was a throwaway concept that was discussed early on and then forgotten. The concept of equity was touched on throughout the workshop, but in our final workshop session, we discussed it explicitly, placing the work we'd been doing within the larger framework of equity-minded practices. We wanted our participants to understand that by making their assignments better scaffolded and more transparent, they were already doing some of the work to make their classes more equitable. So on this slide, you can see a screenshot of one of our final breakout room activities in which we asked participants to consider how the work they'd done related to student equity. We gave them about 5 minutes to jot down their own personal thoughts on it, and then of course we came together in small groups and discussed it. And as I'm sure you all know, that kind of reflection is really useful to driving home concepts. All right. So another update we made to the workshop was we revised our approach to the final showcase to encourage more participant buy-in. As Trista said, in earlier versions of the workshop, we struggled to get all of the participants to submit work to share at the end of the workshop. Rather than having each participant make hard copies of their assignment and talk at length about their work, we designed a simple, relatively low-stakes digital showcase. We did this by creating a Google Slides presentation with a placeholder slide for each participant and asked them to edit their slide to show a before and after representation of just one aspect of their prompt that they'd revised during the workshop. So for example, someone might focus just on sharing their revised purpose statement, or they might talk about how they scaffolded a larger assignment into smaller pieces. This format worked well for several reasons. Firstly, most participants were familiar with Google Slides and all had access to it through university accounts, so there was not a steep technological learning curve. Second, with Google Slides, we could generate a shareable link and everyone could work in the slideshow at the same time. This way, when we set aside time during the final workshop day to edit their slides for the digital showcase, everyone was able to access the document at once. And they could see what other people were doing and draw reassurance that what they were sharing was on par with their peers' work. By lowering the stakes of the workshop and giving the participants time to work on it during our session, we were able to generate much more buy-in from participants from the final showcase. As a result, this final showcase was a valuable community building tool as well as a reflective exercise. All of these changes were made even more effective by our move to an online platform. This move was compulsory, of course, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we found that many of the online elements actually worked even better for us than when we held the workshop in person. The online format was great for sharing resources. For example, participants were able to upload work and we were able to share resources like PowerPoint slides and handouts. Not only is making these materials available to our participants a good practice for accessibility, it was often more useful to our participants than physical deliverables. So for example, when we dedicated more time to covering rubrics, we gave our participants access to the Word files of our sample templates, and then they could simply edit them and make rubrics of their own. We were also able to create supplementary materials like annotated bibliographies with embedded links to research that enabled participants to dig deeper into concepts if they chose to. Overall, one of the most valuable aspects of the shift to online was the way it enabled us to provide those asynchronous feedback sessions and one-on-one meetings. This would have been much harder to do under the constraints of meeting physically and only during workshop hours. And in the future, we'll likely continue using a virtual or at least hybrid format for the workshop. So these 5 updates were just some of the changes that we made as we worked to improve our workshop, and we feel that these changes are particularly impactful and made our participants' experience richer and hopefully help the faculty reduce equity gaps in their classrooms and facilitate student success.
And that's really a perfect transition for our last participant because with us is Dr. Nayan Ramirez, who's going to talk about how he applied what he learned in this workshop in his own classroom.
Yeah, so I participated in the workshop during my first year as faculty member at CSUN, and something that I think everyone can appreciate when you've been to graduate school is that they don't necessarily teach you how to teach. I had a 1-hour teaching seminar that was required, and that was about it. And you surely don't know how to teach well when you leave that seminar. So I really took advantage of the opportunities provided by faculty development. And when I saw this partnership with the LRC, where I was already sending my students, I was like, perfect, it's excellent. I'll get to know the LRC better, and I'll also be able to help my students be more successful. So what I brought to the workshop was my literature review project which is an assignment, the major component actually of my class, where students get to choose a topic of their own interest so that they're more sort of vested into the assignment. And then throughout the semester, we work on different steps building up to a final literature review. You can see on the left-hand side that it has about 4 steps that I'll talk about more in a little bit. Some of my assignment already had aspects of transparency that we've talked about, but it was sort of inadvertent. And also what I did sort of bring into it already was scaffolding by having the different smaller chunks that made up the larger assignment. So why scaffold assignments? Like we talked about a little bit, and sort of bridging Vygotsky and the student proximal development and knowing how we as instructors can help students succeed. Scaffolding really lets us break down these intimidating large projects into smaller chunks of assignments that build up to the final product that we still want, but while reducing a lot of sort of the anxiety and stress when you have just this one big assignment and it's high stakes and it's 50% of your grade or whatever. By scaffolding, by breaking it down, it gives students more of an opportunity to build skills across the semester instead of a one-off at the end when they're just rushing to do the assignment. Instead, they have multiple steps along the way where they can sort of purposely see what each of the skills and tasks based on the tasks that they're completing. It also on the instructor end allows for more interaction with the students. So I have more of an opportunity to provide feedback extensively throughout the semester instead of one time on the draft that may be great, may not be great. And that really is sort of key and has been one of the most helpful things for me is being able to troubleshoot any issues that come up, whether it's not them, the students not knowing how to access the library site, not knowing what a peer-reviewed article is, not knowing what a citation style is appropriate to use and why we're even asking them to use APA or MLA or anything like that. By not having this all in one single component, it really gives you more of an opportunity to address these little issues. And again, each student is going to be different. So some students are going to get it and fly, and other students are going to need a little bit of help. And something that I know that some of my colleagues had sort of questions about was, is this going to lead to more time grading? It may seem like it does at first. It actually, in my opinion, does not at all, because you have a rubric, you have these individual components, and the more that you do this assignment across multiple semesters, the easier it gets to do it actually, and it becomes sort of secondhand. So why specifically scaffold a literature review? I think something that you quickly learn if you ever assign one is that students have never been asked to do one before. They may have been asked to write an argumentative essay or summarize a piece of journalism, but they don't often know what a literature review is until they get to your class and especially in the social sciences, we're like, okay, go review the literature and let us know what we know. And they're like, why? It already exists, it's already out there. Why are you asking me to do this boring task? Part of the sort of the boringness of literature review though lends itself really well for transparent assignment design because there's individual components that make up the literature review. I've seen with some of my colleagues, and I did this very early on, that when you have the literature review as a single assignment, especially if it's at the end of the semester, students will procrastinate, which then leads them not to complete the assignment correctly because it's overwhelming. How do I find articles? How do I summarize them? How do I synthesize all this material? It gets really overwhelming really quickly, and they don't end up meeting the student learning outcomes that we want them to meet. So instead, by scaffolding and breaking it up into smaller building blocks, they're able to see the value of each of those individual components, the value of an outline, a draft, and all those things, while still completing the final literature review and actually at a higher sort of quality than they would have without any of these aspects. So how did I scaffold my literature review? So like I mentioned, I brought it in partially scaffolded. On the left-hand side, you can see that there were 4 major steps: an annotated bibliography, an outline, a first draft, and a final draft. But I quickly realized during that workshop and sort of in subsequent semesters that I was putting too many things into a single assignment. So even with an annotated bibliography on the original literature review, I was also asking them to pick a topic at the same time and find APA or journal articles in APA citation style. That was a lot. There were lots of issues. Some would get some components of the project, some of them wouldn't get some components of the bibliography. So what I did in the redesign was really break it down into all the steps that it takes to build up to the literature review. So the very first thing that they do is pick a topic of their choosing. The second thing is letting them know how to access the library, how to choose peer-reviewed articles, why we even care that they be peer-reviewed articles, what does peer review mean? All of these, by breaking it down, you're actually able to delve in a little bit more deep into what these individual components each compose. The annotated bibliography was pretty much the same. They choose 10 articles, they annotate them, summarize them, standard sort of annotations. The theme organization map was something that I actually got from Loretta after the workshop, because I think we were sending a lot of students over to the LRC asking them to synthesize this material, and students don't necessarily understand what synthesizing material means or what even finding common themes and differences across different sources are. So by providing this extra step has been one of the most useful things in my class that I've witnessed, is they are able to see how their annotated bibliography can be used to see what articles can we talk about in the same paragraph, what articles are actually in contrast to each other. So they set up a nice little sort of differences paragraph for them to talk about. And it really makes it a lot easier for them to move from an annotated bibliography to an outline, which is what I thought was easy to do early on, but actually involves more than I realized as I started doing this more. Then they do a pretty short outline. Something that I do tell them across this project is the more that you write up front, the less that you have to write later on, because you can use the same sentences that you're writing for your annotated bibliography or your theme organization map. And once they get that, and some of them do and some of them don't, some of them still are writing short little sentences, but they quickly see the benefit of writing more because they can use that later on, and it decreases the amount of time they're spending on their outline, their first draft, their final draft. After the first draft in both components, there is a peer review and instructor review process, but I don't include that necessarily as part of the project format. All right, so I'm going to show you on the next slide one of the individual assignments that's part of the larger literature review. The outline on the left-hand side is the screenshot that I've shown you in the last couple of slides, where you see sort of the overview of the literature review project with the different steps. I did describe why they would write an outline and how to sort of develop the outline. So it had some of the aspects of transparency, but they weren't as delineated as they are on the right-hand side with the redesigned assignment. I did have grading criteria and a rubric, which I think is useful to have. So I was able to use some of the things that were already part of my assignment, which I think is also sometimes what instructors are concerned about, that I have to start over from scratch and create something completely new. You don't, right? You can use what you have and just build off of that. So on the right-hand side, you can see sort of more of what we've been talking about, the clearly purpose for the skills and the knowledge that the students will gain, the individual tasks that will lead them to success, submission instructions, if you really are sort of, I want it to be 1-inch margins, anything like that, and then the criteria for success along with a rubric that's on the next page. Something that I do think is important to sort of emphasize is the helpfulness of examples, which is on the next slide. And you can see on the right hand side, this is just one page of the example. The actual assignment ended up being like 10 pages because I gave them 3 examples, and it was, I think before I used to think that they had to be concise and all in one page for them to understand it, and no, I think more is better, especially if you're giving them examples where they can see exactly what you're expecting and how they're going to meet the rubric or the criteria for success. And then, like we've been talking about, if you can annotate them, even better. I usually annotate examples that have some sort of errors, whether it's APA citations that weren't correctly formatted. I'll show them like, well, you should italicize the journal name and stuff like that. And I think that has been one of the things that I've heard from the students is the most useful thing. And I think in the workshop, I remember some of my colleagues being really resistant to examples because they would think it was too much hand holding, too much paint by the numbers. They're just going to copy this and it's going to look exactly the same across multiple students. And in my experience, that hasn't been the case. And I think also when we think about how we were all students once, right? Or we are students now, we learn from examples. I remember getting to my master's thesis and having no idea what it should look like and being really stressed out about it being at the appropriate length. What does it look like? What's the tone? And I only was able to do that because some of my friends gave me their master's theses, and then I was able to see what to do. So I think examples really go a long way, and you can give multiple examples so that you don't feel like they're just going to copy example 1. If you give 3-4 examples of an A, a B, a C, they're able to see sort of what's going to lead them to success even more clearly. This is some feedback from students from my evaluations after the end of the semester, or during the semester, but that you get after the end of the semester. So you can see quickly what they're usually concerned about, which is the stress that these huge high stakes assignments will have on them. And that by breaking it down into these smaller parts, which may seem like more work up front, and I usually do get that comment early on in the semester, they're like, oh, this is a lot of work. But then once they start going through the semester and see that it's all building off of each other and that it's not busy work, that it's actually helpful, they're always surprised by anything being helpful. They really see the benefit of that. So across both of these comments, you can see that they were really stressed out by the writing process, these huge projects, but by breaking it down and showing them how to do each of the steps, they're able to sort of decrease that anxiety and stress and apprehension actually that a lot of students have. So this is sort of to summarize the impact that the scaffolded and transparent design has had on the students and on me. So it's been easier to help students a bunch when they run into trouble, and also earlier on during the semester. So it's not at the end when everyone's overworked and stressed out and tired. You can actually give better feedback throughout the semester. There's less time spent on grading. I think that's one of the concerns often, that you're going to spend more time on grading. But if you build in rubrics, if you build in examples and all these things, it actually makes it a lot easier for them to meet your expectations. There's less stress, like the feedback just showed, on students, especially at the end of the semester. I think a lot of the times we all assign big assignments at the end and forget that they're taking 5 classes. And this way, at least for my class, they have a full draft of literature review a month before the end of the semester, so it's not as stressful. There's also better final assignments overall. Again, they really appreciate the examples and benefit from them. And then on the practical side, as the instructor, it reduces the amount of questions that you get about what the expectations are. And something that I didn't include here, but I think is also important, is as you move forward after sort of learning the tools from transparent assignment design, when you're designing new assignments, it almost becomes second nature to think about the purpose, the task, the criteria for success. So that's something that I now, in any assignment I'm thinking about, especially when we've moved on to online learning, is let me make sure that this is, maybe it's not perfectly transparent up front, but now I'm always thinking about these different things to ensure that we're bringing equity into the classroom.
And that does conclude our presentation. We want to thank you for your time today, and we do welcome any questions that you may have for us.
All right, and that concludes our video. So I'm going to go ahead and hand over the presentation to our lovely presenters.
Great, thank you. I believe Trista is here, so I'm really glad. We were partly why we recorded this. We weren't sure if all of the presenters were going to make it, but Nayan is here, and Trista is here as well. So Trista, I'm happy to sort of lead the discussion if you have to go, but I wanted to check in with you if you wanted to. There you are. I think you're muted.
I was just saying, hi, I'm here. I'm here for questions. Nayan's here for questions. I think you have 3 of 4 of us here.
Yes, 3 out of 4, pretty good. So the first question, Trista, I can sort of be your chat master if you want. Might make it easier, but the first question was, how many attendees have you had thus far at the workshops?
So we've kept them small and intimate, if you will. So I think, and we learned from the first iteration we had, I believe, were there 3 consultants, Loretta, or even maybe 4?
There were 4, and I think the first one was actually
the biggest one. Yeah, we learned that the smaller, as long as faculty development was okay with us sort of running it in a smaller, more intimate manner, what we found is if we assign about 3 to 5 faculty members per consultant, that works out pretty well because everybody can have individualized attention. It's a good sized work group, and we've run it. How many semesters in a row, Loretta? Forgive me, I believe.
4. Well, we took one off, so it would normally be 5. Right.
Yeah, the semester that the COVID pandemic erupted, we had to skip that semester. But other than that, we've been running them consecutively since we started every semester.
And then I think there's 2 raised hands here. Rebecca, if you wanted to hop in.
Sure. Thank you so much for this presentation. So I am already a big fan of transparent assignments, and I've started using that model in my faculty development work as well. I have a similar role. I'm the Writing Center Director and the de facto Writing in the Disciplines faculty development person at the University of Washington, Tacoma. So I have 2 questions. one small scale and one big picture. The first one is I have been also a big fan of using lists of verbs for learning, and I was just wondering which list you used, or if you would share that, or maybe you already have put that in your handouts. I apologize if you already did. And then the second question is, I appreciated the sources of resistance that you posted from faculty, and I was a few minutes late joining, so I apologize if you already addressed this at the beginning. The main source of resistance that I have encountered is just a skepticism that there is such thing as like insiders and outsiders. So I was working with a history professor, and I was like, well, you know, even to do this assignment that seems relatively straightforward that you're talking about requires like all these domains of knowledge and expertise. She's like, oh, no, I'm just asking them to, you know, whatever, summarize or enter the conversation or whatever. So, which as we know, does require like quite a bit of scaffolding and insider knowledge in order to do that effectively. So my big picture question is if you have encountered that kind of resistance and what you have communicated to people about that.
Constantly. Constantly. Yeah,
I think that the example that Loretta went through, I believe it's a math example, I really find that when you use examples from other disciplines, it really does help faculty to sort of understand that idea of, you know, the invisible curriculum or the insider-outsider knowledge sort of differences. So I think it's just having those conversations and sort of backing up like, well, what information would you need to know, like based on this pre-transparent redesign? What information would you need to know that's not listed here in the steps or on the prompt? And usually the conversation that breaks out from that question, there's differing opinions, and that right there starts to help folks to understand it's not as clear, it's not as cut and dry as we think it is. I know you asked that first question about the verbs for significant learning, and I believe Loretta did upload.
I did, yeah. So there's what we did was part of the UNLV Winkelmes material that we learned from and used some of. There was a very extensive list of significant verbs for learning, and we found it to be a little bit overwhelming. So I took that and pared it down to avoid repetition and just get something that we could use actually in our activities so that instructors could actually work on revising their purpose or their tasks or whatever using those verbs right there in our workshop. So it is, I did get the list, and I've referenced like where I adapted it from. So we did take a larger list and sort of pared it down. And then it looks like, Erin?
Nayan, did you want to add like faculty perspective on that question? I'm just curious.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think partially too, and I get this with sort of pitching the transparent workshops to other faculty, and it's a lot of like, well, no, it's easy enough to do. They already know what to do, and but I think the best luck I've had in having other people actually go through with it is sort of really just constantly talking about it and showing them sort of, this is what I did. It wasn't that hard. And sort of what's kind of special about my department is we have a bunch of new faculty. So I think it's a lot easier with new faculty to get them on board. And it is a little tougher with some of the people that have been around a little bit longer, and they're much more resistant to not just this, I would say lots of things. So it can be tricky.
Change is hard.
And then I'll just add one little thing before addressing Eric's question. But one thing that I thought was really interesting is, we do get resistance, and then we give examples. And one of the things we did to sort of gently address some of the resistance happened when we got a lot of resistance to giving annotated examples. And a lot of professors were saying like, oh, well, this is a paint by numbers, or now they're going to all turn in the same thing. I'm not just going to give them the answers and this and that. And it went on for quite a while, and it was somewhat of a heated sort of discussion. But then at the end of our workshop, what was so interesting was that all of the instructors, pretty much almost every single one, asked for annotated examples of transparent assignments. So one of the things that we did was sort of gently and kindly address the fact that you see, because you're asking for them because they're very helpful. And I think it was really like a revelation to a lot of instructors that like, oh, they too were asking for annotated examples. And so I think doing that, or bringing up examples of that are outside of, that are from a variety of disciplines or outside of a discipline that some of our instructors are experts in, really also helps us like underscore some of that address some of that resistance.
Yeah, just putting the faculty back in the role of student and reminding them of that space, I think, is really helpful with this kind of innovative change.
And then, Eric, did you have a question? I saw your hand went down, but I want to make sure.
Yes, actually, a comment and a question. The comment is something that y'all probably don't have any control over, but I noticed, like in the introductory statistics, that there was no presence of Indigenous students. And I teach at a tribal college, and that's actually a fairly typical thing where Indigenous students might not be large numbers, but they tend to get left out of basically everything. So I don't know if that's something that if anyone has sort of pull with the admin or people keeping those statistics, because again, you're leaving out a whole bunch of people, and especially in California where you've got so many Indigenous peoples there. But that's something I noticed.
It's a fair point. It's a fair point. And we were sort of given those diagrams,
Yeah.
but that's a fair point, and it's definitely worth continued conversations with administration. Definitely. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I do also think that hopefully the issues that we're trying to address, another group that often gets left out is the work that I do in disability studies. And a lot of times students with disabilities are left out of the conversation. And so in the same way, though, I do think that transparent design and some of this work that we're doing with instructors, ideally, I hope that what's good for, one set of students ideally would be good for, the broadest spectrum of students, while still understanding certain groups of students' individual needs and addressing those.
Right. And the question I had was sort of related to that in terms of like culturally responsible assignments, in terms of how you can design transparent assignments that will also engage a variety of students, in terms of why is this assignment relevant to us particularly. I mean, I know it's impossible to account for everyone, but I'm just wondering if that's a potential part of a helping faculty to develop more culturally responsive assignments, depending on the kinds of students they teach.
Yeah, I know that faculty development at Cal State Northridge definitely has other programming. And so what I'm really hoping we can accomplish with this particular workshop is, especially since we've revised it so that we have that equity piece, like where we sort of hit it a little harder with that idea, we're hoping we can sort of use that as a way to sort of filter faculty into the next thing that they can learn from faculty development. And they're working on new programming, anti-racist pedagogy programming, cultural humility programming, like those things are happening in faculty development. I wish we could be part of all of it, but unfortunately we are just one writing center. So, but yes, that's definitely something that the director of faculty development, Whitney Scott, is definitely working very hard at CSUN. Yeah.
I'll just address Liz's comment in the, I think she might have just sent it just to me, but I'll just address it because I think it's appropriate. And then Andrea, if you want to ask your question, but Liz asks, have you had faculty from non-writing classes do this workshop? And we actually have. We had, what was it? Someone in, is it geography?
We've had geography. We've had family and consumer sciences. Yeah, so I think we get a fair amount of faculty that are not. I don't know if we had anyone with us, but Whitney in another workshop had someone from math.
And so yeah, I remember. I think it was a geography instructor who's participated in quite a few of our faculty development collaborations. And it's been interesting and challenging sort of for us to also, you know, it's helped me actually as an instructor and a writing consultant to get out of the sort of the humanities mindset, but we've certainly helped them create more transparent assignments. And that's one of the reasons I give the example that I do in the PowerPoint, the example with the multiple choice question, because something like a multiple choice question or something that is just like solve this problem that you get in some of the other disciplines that aren't writing heavy, you know, they might sort of believe that transparency, this model doesn't apply to their courses or their pedagogy. And I think that we've shown ways in which it is very significant and can, you know, strengthen understanding and success for students. Andrea, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just was wondering, first of all, this is great. And I love just all the suggestions you have, especially the examples. I'm putting those right into the PowerPoint slide and having faculty view each other's stuff in the annotation. So that's just a comment. But my question is this, do you find, are you more effective in getting faculty to change assignments if you take sort of an incremental approach, or a more, I don't know, revolution, you know, kind of evolutionary versus revolution, or does it just depend on like the individual instructor? Yeah, I'm just curious about your experience, something more radical or kind of, you know, easy does it? I'd love to hear your experience.
I think we learned. I think the first time we did this, we were looking for something bigger, and then we learned, just like with students, you have to meet the faculty where they are. And some folks just had more time, more energy, more bandwidth. So as we went on, we sort of opened up the space where it's like, you can just revise one part of this, right? Where, you know, even if you just had time to work out the task portion or to add purpose to assignments where you did not have explicit purpose before. And we found that to be a really important change, right? Loretta, you want to add to that?
Yeah, and you know, and it was interesting as we were creating this presentation, talking to Nayan, who's been so amazing sending students to the Writing Center and working with us, but also, you know, we kind of felt from, he's like, oh wow, I would have loved some of these things that Melissa addresses, Melissa who couldn't be here, because you know, he was kind of our guinea pig. He was in our first round, and so I thought it was great. I thought we did some really great things, but he really sort of underscored for us how much we've changed every single semester. You know, it hasn't been a static thing. It's been growing and changing. And it's been really interesting how we've addressed that, and to see actually, as Melissa pointed out in the PowerPoint, how important and helpful, weirdly enough, COVID-19 has been to get actually instructor faculty participation. So, for example, I think the final showcase doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And I don't think, well, it was a big deal to us, but I don't think faculty often took it very seriously, or they're like, I don't have time for this. And making sure that we had a Zoom thing and this Google slide on Canvas that we were like, okay, we're going to take 25 minutes and we want you to take screenshots of a before and an after and just stick them up there right in your Google slide, and we knew everyone had access to it. So there's kind of like no getting around it, if that makes sense. We sort of forced them into it in a you know, a pleasant kind of way. We kind of pushed them.
I would say what we did is we practiced what we were preaching a little bit. So we were like, what do we want faculty to spend their own limited, very valuable bandwidth on? And what we wanted them to focus on was revising those assignments, not trying to figure out how to put together the slideshow, how to present their work to each other, right? So when we took, so we sort of, you know, there was that invisible part of our own presentations that we sort of added in for the faculty, and that really increased participation. So we took some of the pressure off, we made it easier for faculty, and gave them that valuable time back to just focus on revising their work. And I think that made a big difference.
Yeah, and it also allowed them to really talk about it in a way that was generative, I think, and fun, and not as formal because the stakes were low. So you got to see the excitement, not just in their revised assignment, but also in like what they teach. You know, they got to like share that with people across the disciplines, which I thought was really powerful.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's helpful because I like Nayan is like the A+ student, and I love that you kind of have, you know, like to say to someone it's less daunting. Hey, you might want to, like your example of tell students why you want them to do this, or add some criteria. Like I feel like that would be just for certain faculty who are like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm at a research. They're like, I can't. I'm coming up for tenure. I've got to like just publish. So I could say, hey, just add a sentence or two about, so that's great, you know, and then maybe the next year they can, so like that incremental, or if they're super keen, yeah, they can go whole hog. So yeah, that's so helpful. Thank you. And the technology thing too, I get, it can be daunting, right? Teaching those workshops. So I love that your thing is so simple. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Farah, did you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to echo that this is great. And my question is, do you have any tips or advice about helping faculty imagine an assignment from a student perspective? Like, how did you help them get into that mindset? Because I think that's one of the bigger hurdles, you know. So I'm just curious how you went about that.
Yeah, I'm a huge hoarder of assignments, especially if they're outside of my discipline. As Trista knows, like I reach out to professors all the time, and I have that ability because I work at the Writing Center. It's one of the cool things that I love about being a consultant at the Writing Center. So I will say like, hey, you know, I'll let Trista know I'm going to reach out to this professor. I've been noticing a lot of their students coming to us in, you know, nursing or health administration or criminology, and I can be a bulldog. Like I'll prod, I'll keep, you know, in a friendly way. Like I'll say like, hi, you know, can I get these? I also go to because we do outreach, right? So we do presentations. So if there's a professor who does outreach, I might ask them, hey, consider us. So I collect assignments and I ask their permission, and I explain explicitly like how we're going to use it. But it's always great to get assignments that are outside of from a variety of disciplines. So when you show instructors something that's so far out of their discipline, if they're an anthropology professor, showing them an assignment in business administration or whatever, and suddenly you take away that you make them a student again, right? Like you take away that that knowledge that they forget that they even have, you know, that it's just a lot of assumptions are made because of where we're at and the learning that we've done and the type of students probably most of us were when we were, you know, that's why we went to grad school. And so putting an instructor in a position of learning, right, like, where they don't know how things go, you know, asking a student, a professor who's never written an APA paper and only written MLA to look at this and talk about and think about it, for example, or, you know, think about it in a different way is really, really helpful when we're doing our workshops.
And even before we start to look at pedagogy and assignment design specifically, Whitney Scott has these great set of assignments that we usually open up with where, you know, she shows a picture of a car where the doors aren't obvious and asks, can you tell how many doors this car has? And most folks are like, no. So it's like, you know, showing faculty, like putting you in that mindset of like, this is how it feels when you don't know what's going on, right? So like reminding faculty, or like we do icebreakers. So it's like an opening question of like, think back to a time where you had to like, where you were put in a situation where you really did not know what your next move was going to be. And then having conversations about that. So it's just really like, remember, you're an expert here, but you're not an expert everywhere. And your students are not yet experts, right? So like, you know, just sort of helping to reframe and recenter, I think has really been helpful for us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Those were great questions. Excuse me.
I think we might have time for one more question if there's anybody else out there that had a question or a comment. We appreciate you all coming today. This is definitely a labor of love at the Writing Center. This might be one of our favorite things that we do. So
it is. And I really think that one of the great things has been, you know, instructors who are resistant, when they come around for whatever reason, they decide to join it. And then when they come around and they do it and they're so excited about it and they're like, wow, that was really helpful. And I think it's also important they get a better sense of what we do at the Writing Center. Again, I mentioned that Annie and I were discussing it at the very beginning of the panel. There's often a misconception about what we do, what we can do, what we should do, what we do. And so it really does help to underscore what we can do for their students, but also how we can actually help instructors. You know, we're here to facilitate the instructor's success as well. And I think that this project has really helped a lot of instructors outside of English. You know, we get the English folks. There are, you know, they'll send their students, but we get people from across the disciplines. So it's been an awesome experience.
I agree, Eric. I think I've learned so much about being an educator from my time in writing centers. And it's really great to learn about what other folks are doing in other disciplines too, and finding where we come together, where we converge. Well, thank you all.
Yes, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everybody.
Send your students to the Writing Center.
Yes.
Thank you.